The ride to Matthew's house was a silent one. Matthew didn't say a word, and Julia kept her mouth completely shut. At this point, she had noticed Matthew's silence ever since his parents made their announcement yesterday. He hadn't even disturbed her in any way since then. Julia felt like Matthew's parents had forced him to accept her in his house against his will, and she kind of felt guilty about it. It wasn't like she wanted to go there anyway. She only agreed because his mother insisted. Either way, Julia didn't want to rile him up. She was in a vulnerable situation right now, and she knew this was no time to use her smart tongue. Her people of refuge were no longer around to save her. Once they got to Matthew's house, he just got out of the car and went directly inside. Julia had been here on several occasions when she worked as his personal assistant. Matthew used to ask her over randomly, and most times, it was just to play housekeeper. He'd have her clean, wash, cook, stock his house, and more, just like a typical maid. So, Julia knew her way around. Thinking of all those times she struggled while working for him, she wondered why she had stayed that long. This man was really just fooling her. He didn't give her any extra pay either, but Julia made sure to cash out from the commissions when she went shopping. The money was good, kind of why she never complained about doing his chores, no matter how frustrating he made them. Julia helped herself inside, unpacked her things in the guest room, and made herself comfortable. That night, Julia made up her mind to do her job. She knew Matthew would most definitely make things difficult for her, but she wouldn't have to deal with him much because he'd be at the office the whole day. She knew that much. Matthew was a workaholic. He never missed a day of work. The thought of staying in the house the whole day and getting a hefty pay for it excited her so much. The next morning, Julia woke up early to prepare breakfast. She knew how early Matthew normally left for work, so she tried her best to accommodate his schedule. By the time Matthew came out, fully dressed for work, Julia had already set the breakfast table for him. "Good morning, sir. Your breakfast is ready," she said respectfully. Matthew stared at her, scanning her from head to toe like she was some alien being. Julia was a little caught off guard by his stare. "Why are you not in uniform?" he asked. It took a while for Julia to understand what he meant. "I didn't know I had to wear a uniform," she said. "And why wouldn't you wear one? Aren't you a maid?" he questioned rudely. "If you don't have one, get one." "I don't tolerate unprofessionalism around me," he ordered. "I have one, but your parents said I didn't have to wear it," Julia said. She wasn't opposed to dressing like a maid. She knew what she had signed up for when she decided to be a housekeeper. She had grown up in an orphanage. Doing housework was not embarrassing for her. "This is not my parents' house. This is my house, and here, you follow my rules," he affirmed. Julia kept quiet. She was not shocked at all. There was only so much she could expect from Matthew. She just waited patiently and hoped he would leave soon so she could enjoy herself in this luxurious house. But Matthew had other plans. He was just so good at being bad. He said he would have his breakfast at the office, and Julia would have to personally bring it to him. Julia couldn't believe her ears. She offered to pack it up for him so he could drive to work with it, but Matthew wasn't having any of that. He said he didn't have to move around with food when there were people he paid to do that. He was mocking Julia, in a way. "Wear your uniform and bring my breakfast just the way I want it. And be fast about it. Don't keep me waiting," he ordered and just walked out, leaving Julia boiling in anger. It took a while for her to compose herself. She knew Matthew would make life hard for her. That was nothing new, but she never expected this at all. She realized there was obviously going to be more to this. He was just getting started. Julia decided to keep an open mind. She gave herself a pat on the back and encouraged herself. If she had survived 7 months, she could survive a few more. So, she packed up the breakfast, dressed up, and took a bus to the company. She just wanted to get this over with. Delaying would only make it worse for her. Once Julia arrived at the company, she easily made it in because everyone there knew her. In fact, people were so shocked that they just stared at her, so no one stopped her. They couldn't believe their eyes. The last time they saw Julia, she was dressed in high-end office clothes, and now she was wearing a maid's uniform. That was a complete downgrade. Julia just ignored them. She wasn't here for a happy reunion. You passed by the personal assistant's office before reaching Matthew's office, and just as Julia reached the entrance, Nancy walked out. She was shocked to see Julia. She couldn't believe her eyes. Julia, on the other hand, just wished she had never seen her. Of all the people in this company, Nancy was the second most annoying person, the first being Matthew. Of course, no one was above him. Nancy burst out in laughter as she kept looking at Julia. Julia just rolled her eyes. Nancy's opinions and ridicule were pointless to her. "You're a maid now," she mocked. "I must say, you look really good in that uniform." She laughed. "I'm guessing you're here to beg for your job. Well, I have news for you. I'm the CEO's new personal assistant, and he is so pleased with my work, so you need to leave," Nancy bragged. Julia didn't give much attention to her nonsense. "I'm not here for your job. You can keep it." "I don't want anything to do with it, trust me," she said. Nancy didn't believe her. Why else would Julia come here in a maid's uniform? It obviously looked like she had come to throw a pity party and beg for forgiveness. Julia told her she was just there to drop off breakfast for the boss, which only increased Nancy's suspicions. "If you don't believe me, you can ask him yourself. In fact, he asked me to give the package to you," Julia said, trying to sound as convincing as possible. She hoped Nancy would believe her. She had just come up with the plan of sending Nancy with the breakfast. Julia knew Matthew would definitely give her a hard time, so she hoped to slip out without having to meet him. Besides, she used to take him breakfast when she was his personal assistant. It was only fair that Nancy did it as well, since she was his new personal assistant. But Nancy didn't buy her story. She believed Julia was up to something. At this point, she didn't know that Julia worked for Matthew, so she thought he would be really angry to find out that Julia was here. The idea of getting Julia in trouble excited Nancy so much. Julia was so disappointed to see her last resort for saving herself from a whole day of torture fail as she watched Nancy walk into the CEO's office. Nancy was giving a report to Matthew, but as usual, she was being ignored. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. Nancy had been asked to step in as a temporary personal assistant to the CEO. The Human Resources Department had asked whether to inform the public about a job vacancy in order to shortlist some candidates for the position, but the CEO had firmly refused. So, Nancy was asked to fill in until he changed his mind and decided to hire a permanent employee for the position. Nancy, of course, jumped at the offer. She saw it as a great opportunity to get closer to Matthew and maybe befriend him, but he hadn't given her any attention. He was always professional, and all of Nancy's efforts had been in vain. After she finished giving the report to a very uninterested Matthew, he asked her to leave. "Sir, there's something else," she said, but Matthew didn't say anything, so she just continued explaining. "There's a maid outside. She said you asked her to come here and bring breakfast," Nancy informed him, sounding a little spiteful. Matthew quickly looked at Nancy after hearing this. Nancy was pleased, thinking he was surely mad. "Sir, should I ask her to leave? I can order breakfast for you from your favorite restaurant," she offered. "Let her in immediately," Matthew said, ignoring Nancy and her suggestion. Nancy was agitated. She didn't like this at all. Why was Matthew so open to letting Julia in? Didn't he fire her? The other person who didn't like this whole thing was Julia. She knew Matthew wouldn't just let her go after setting his eyes on her. The sight of him sitting at his desk, looking all bossy, irritated her so much. It had been a few minutes since she entered, but her presence had been completely ignored. She was just standing there like a servant waiting on their master. Ironically, that was exactly her position. She was a servant. "Why are you standing there idly, like a scarecrow? Aren't you here for a reason?" he spat suddenly, startling Julia. Without saying a word, she set out the breakfast she had brought and was just about to leave when Matthew rudely stopped her. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked. "I am leaving, sir," she answered. "Did I ask you to leave? Who exactly is going to clear up once I'm done having my breakfast?" he asked, confusing Julia. What did he mean by that? She wondered. "Nancy can clear everything up," she answered, as if it were obvious. She used to clean up this whole office, let alone clear a few dishes when she was his assistant, so why couldn't Nancy do it now that she was the new one? "She is my office assistant, not my maid. That is not her job description," he said, and Julia couldn't believe her ears. Wasn't this just a direct jab at her? She was indeed a maid now, but she hadn't been a maid when he had her running around doing his chores. She had been a personal assistant too, but apparently her job description had included being a maid. Now, suddenly, specific job descriptions applied to Nancy. Matthew took his precious time having breakfast as he occupied himself with other things. Julia sat in the corner and did her best to keep her composure as she waited for him to finish, so she could hopefully leave in peace. But it was far-fetched to even dream of peace while being under Matthew's mercy, because he had other plans for her. "I want my lunch by 1 p.m. sharp," he ordered as Julia packed up. She couldn't believe her ears. Just as she thought she was free, he came up with something else. Then again, this was Matthew after all. What else could she expect? Julia offered to go to his favorite restaurant immediately and personally bring his food, as he normally wanted, but he wasn't having that. "Why would I eat restaurant food when I have a servant solely to cook for me? Have you forgotten why my mom asked you to come live with me? You are supposed to supply me with home-cooked meals. That's your job," he pointed out. "What exactly does that mean?" Julia asked. "Are you dumb? It means you will prepare and serve my breakfast and lunch to me here at the office and make sure my dinner is well set out by the time I get home. It should all be timely, too. I will not pay you for nothing," he said rudely. Julia felt like strangling him. What exactly had she ever done to this man? Why was he so dead set on frustrating her life? She didn't want to give him the pleasure of a victory over her. Julia tried to reason with him. His kitchen was practically empty. There wasn't much to cook. That kitchen was so bare, she was sure the last person who had used it was herself, months back. Matthew handed his card to her and asked her to buy whatever was necessary. That was not a problem to him at all. "But sir, it's 11 a.m. How do you expect me to go to the market, then home, cook food, and come back here by 1 p.m.? She questioned. Matthew, of course, didn't care. Her role was to follow rules without question. He would only make it harder for her if she kept insisting. Julia tried her best to quicken her pace, but she was no god. She made it back to the company at 2 p.m., exhausted yet obviously unappreciated, because the first thing Matthew did was remind her how late she was. Julia explained that she had done her best to make it on time, but he simply reprimanded her, saying her best wasn't enough. After hours of complaints and ridicule, Julia found herself rushing home again to prepare his dinner. This was just the first day at his house, yet he had already reminded her why she had quit her job 2 months ago. He hadn't changed at all. In fact, he was worse now. The next day, Julia woke up very early. She prepared and properly packed Matthew's breakfast and lunch. "Good morning, sir," she greeted him as he came downstairs, fully dressed for work. "Your breakfast is ready. I've set up the table for you," she informed him, pointing at the breakfast table. "I'll have my breakfast at the office." "Bring it on time," Matthew ordered as he headed out. "Oh, about that. I suspected you might want to have breakfast at the office, so I prepared and packed both breakfast and lunch for you. I've already placed them in your car," she said proudly. "This one that you don't want, I'll have it myself," she added, pointing at the neatly set breakfast table. Matthew just stared at her for a few seconds. He could see how proud she was of her actions. "Wow, I'm impressed. At least you're good at something. Maybe being a maid is your real calling," he mocked, but Julia didn't care. "Thank you so much, sir. I am happy," she laughed. Matthew didn't oppose her in any way. After he left, Julia danced around, changed into her comfortable clothes, and prepared to enjoy her day just as she had envisioned. Shortly after she started watching TV, her phone rang. It was Matthew calling. Julia knew something was up, so she completely ignored the call and the numerous others that followed. She planned to tell him later that she hadn't had her phone with her and that it was on silent mode. But her plan was thwarted when she received a message from him. "If you ignore my next call, I will personally come to get you." Julia felt a chill run down her spine after reading it. That was a clear threat. Matthew's presence in her life was a constant threat. She didn't want him to come here. Just seconds after he sent that message, he called again. This time, Julia immediately answered. "So you actually know how to answer a call," he said, clearly irritated. "I'm sorry, sir. I was outside watering the flowers, and my phone was in my bedroom, she explained. That makes complete sense. You always have an excuse for your incompetence, he retorted. It's 10 a.m., and I haven't had my breakfast. Do you have an excuse for that too? Julia was caught off guard. She reminded Matthew that she had packed his breakfast and placed it in the back seat of his car along with his lunch. She was surprised to hear Matthew say he knew about that. He said he had even seen it and clearly remembered her telling him about it earlier. What I don't understand is why you haven't served it to me yet, he said, sounding completely unaware. Sir, what are you talking about? I packed everything and placed it in your car. What do you need me there for? You already drove to the office with the meals, she asked, trying to conceal her irritation. I didn't bring the food up to my office. I'm not stupid, nor am I a delivery man to be moving around with food. I drove my car to the company and parked it in the parking lot. That's where it is, he explained. Your breakfast is in the car. Just ask Nancy to go get it and serve you. Trust me, she'll be more than willing to do it, Julia said. I have no doubt about that. She is a very hardworking girl who knows how to do her job. But this is not her job description. She is not a maid, he affirmed. So, what do you want? Julia snapped. This is what I mean when I say you don't know how to do your job. You expect me to teach you how to do your own job, he mocked. Julia, you have 10 minutes, he warned firmly, and ended the call. Julia felt like pulling her hair out in frustration. Just when she thought she was going to have a peaceful day, he came up with yet another reason to disturb her. Begrudgingly, she got dressed and left for the company. Upon reaching there, she hurried to Matthew's office. Nancy, surprisingly, didn't stop her this time, though she was obviously irritated by her presence. Julia went into Matthew's office, grabbed his car keys from the keyholder tray near the entrance, and stormed out. Matthew was in the office, but she didn't even glance at him. She rushed to the parking lot, retrieved the food from his car, and took everything back to his office. She set his breakfast out the way he wanted it without waiting for his permission. Matthew was just observing her the whole time. Sir, I have served your breakfast. Your lunch is in that food flask. I have brought it up for you so you can have it later, she explained. Julia tried her best to conceal her irritation, but it was still obvious. This man had made her come all the way from home just to serve him breakfast because, apparently, he was too important to do it himself. Why do you seem angry? I should be the one angry. Do you have any idea how long you've made me wait? I gave you 10 minutes, but you took close to an hour to get here, acting like you're the one who's been wronged. It's long past breakfast time. It's almost noon, he complained. I am so sorry, sir, but it's here now, and I've served it for you.
Can I leave? She asked.
Of course, you can leave. I hate seeing your face. But you have to wait for me to finish eating so you can take the dirty dishes out and leave my office clean, he instructed. Julia was irritated, but she had expected this, so she waited. Matthew took his sweet time eating, purposely trying to frustrate her even more. Once he was done, Julia packed up everything and excused herself. Just as she was walking out, she heard his dreadful voice again. Make sure I have my lunch on time. I will not excuse your incompetence again today, he said, and Julia stopped in her tracks. Sir, your lunch is right there, she said, pointing at the food flask and bottle of juice on the cabinet in the corner of his office. I know it's there. I'm not blind. The point is, you better show up on time to serve it for me, he said, and Julia really thought she had misheard him. Sir, you can't be serious. The food is right there. Can't you just pick it up and eat it? She asked. And why should I have to do that? Why do I have to serve myself when I have a server on my payroll? You better be here to do your job on time, he warned. Are you kidding me? You really expect me to travel all that distance just to come back and open a tin of food for you? She asked. That is ridiculous. Can't you do that on your own? She berated. You don't get to tell me what to do. I'm the boss here, okay? And if I serve myself, who'll take the dishes out? Should I do that as well? Should I carry them and wash them myself? He retorted. You can ask Nancy to put the dishes in your car. Once you get home, I'll get them and wash them myself, she suggested. So, you want my assistant and me to do your job for you? And not only do I have to drive to work with food, but now I have to drive back to my own house with dirty dishes? What do you take me for? Besides, why are you keeping food in my office? Did I permit you to do that? So you've turned my office, my place of work, into a kitchen, he accused. Okay, I'll go keep it in the break room and ask Nancy to help serve it for me. We're good friends, she won't mind, she explained. So you want to keep my food, my own food, unattended in a place where my employees keep their food? What if someone poisons it? Do you have any idea how important I am and how many enemies I have? He barked. Julia just accepted defeat. There was really no winning when it came to Matthew. She carried the food out of the office and went to the break room. It would be pointless to go back home now, only to rush back later. She decided to wait, serve him his lunch, and leave once and for all. Many employees walked in and out of the break room, and Julia could see how they were staring at her, whispering to themselves, but she didn't care. She had bigger issues. Nancy had even come to poke fun at her, but she left after seeing how unresponsive Julia was. At exactly 1 p.m., Julia went to Matthew's office and served him the food. Luckily, he didn't bother her much, but in the days that followed, he kept making her miserable. She was still expected to deliver his breakfast and lunch. She would go to the company twice a day or more because there were random times Matthew would want her to take something he had purposely left at home. And every time she went there, he made sure to frustrate her even further. It was no better when he came home in the evening. The weekends, when he stayed home, were even worse. She had tried to leave several times, but she always remembered Anthony and Christine. Julia knew they'd be back, and she really wanted to live with them again. The easiest way for her to move back in with them would be to live with their son, as they had suggested. Those two were the only parental figures she had ever had, and enduring Matthew's stupid taunts and shenanigans was worth being with them again. What is this? Matthew asked in displeasure. Julia had just served his lunch to him. It's your food, sir, she answered tiredly, knowing well that he was up to more drama. I don't like the taste of this food, he said, pushing the plate away. But you haven't even tasted it, Julia said in disbelief. I don't have to taste it. I've seen it, and I know it must taste horrible. I will not put this concoction in my mouth, he declared. Julia was honestly fed up by now, so she chose the easy way out. You don't have to eat it. I'll pack it all up and take it back home. And what will I eat? He asked. I'll order some food for you. It will be delivered in less than 10 minutes. Just tell me what you want to eat, she suggested. Are you for real? Should I call my mom and tell her that you're trying to feed me junk food prepared by strangers? He accused. Julia just rolled her eyes.
He was sounding like a child now.
Okay, what should I do, sir? She asked. Go back to the house and prepare something else, something more edible, he ordered.
What?
You expect me to go back, prepare something from scratch, and bring it back here just because you don't like this one, something you haven't even tasted? Julia complained. She outrightly refused, pointing out how hard she had worked to prepare the meal, only for him to dismiss it without even tasting it. What was the guarantee that he wouldn't find fault with the next meal she brought? Your job is to serve me the way I want, and I don't want this food. So go and prepare something I actually want. I won't pay you that hefty amount for nothing, he cautioned. Then please, reduce my salary. In fact, don't pay me. I don't care. I just want my peace of mind, Julia begged. So this is your plan? You want to accuse me to my parents that I refuse to pay you? My mom asked me to pay you, and she designated the amount. I'll pay you your money. You, on the other hand, will do your part, and that is to supply me with home-cooked food that my heart desires. My heart does not desire this one, so go back and prepare what I actually want, he instructed. Matthew, being Matthew, was adamant and persistent. He delivered a few of his signature threats, the ones he always used to get his way, and Julia eventually relented, knowing her defensiveness would yield no results as always. Okay, what do you want me to prepare? Tell me the meal that your heart desires, she asked, distastefully. Just go prepare anything and hope I like it. Otherwise, you know what will happen, he said. And Julia lost it. I already did, and clearly failed. You've refused to eat the food I prepared. Just tell me what you want. I don't want to waste my time again just to rely on hope, knowing the kind of hopeless person you are, she barked in anger. Did you just insult me? Listen, I have noticed that ever since you moved in with my parents, you've grown wings. You now disrespect me at will. Need I remind you that my parents are no longer here, and you are at my mercy, he warned. Your parents might not be here, but I can contact them. In fact, I am going to call them and tell them everything you've been putting me through. I'm tired, Julia shouted. Matthew was a little scared by this. If his parents found out, they would definitely make things difficult for him. But he didn't want Julia to see how scared he was, so he kept up his act. Go on, call my parents and tell them everything. Disrupt their long-awaited vacation. It's not like you're a considerate person, he accused. Julia knew Matthew was trying to gaslight her, but he was right. She didn't want to disturb Christine and Anthony. They deserved their fun. She just needed to tolerate Matthew a little longer, no matter how unsettling he made her life. Julia stormed out of his office and was now back on the bus heading home. She could only imagine how many times she had been in buses over the past few days. She had agreed to move in with Matthew, thinking she would just be staying home on her own. But somehow, he had ensured the exact opposite happened. Now she was running up and down the whole day. Most of the bus drivers and passengers now recognized her. Besides, no one could forget a passenger who was always dressed in the same plain uniform. It was rather embarrassing, but Julia had more pressing issues to worry about. Their stares were the least of her problems. Julia's phone suddenly rang, and she felt like throwing it out of the moving bus. She thought Matthew must be calling to drop more orders on her, and she really didn't want to deal with him again. But she knew he wouldn't stop calling, so she decided to answer. However, upon seeing who was calling, a wide smile broke across her face, and she quickly picked up. Julia was so happy to hear from Christine again. Her whole mood changed. She felt vibrant once more. She couldn't even remember the last time she had smiled like this. Christine told her about their vacation and how much fun they were having. She asked Julia how she was and how Matthew was treating her. As much as Julia wanted to ramble on and on about how badly Matthew had been treating her, she knew it wasn't a good idea. Christine and Anthony didn't need to worry themselves about their son's silly antics. Are you sure he's treating you well?
You can be honest with me.
I know my son, and he can be a handful, she urged. But Julia insisted that they were fine and that Matthew was kind and welcoming to her. It was so hard for her to sing praises of Matthew. She even felt bitterness on her tongue just at the mention of his name. After that, they discussed different things as they caught up, since it had been a while. Both of them had missed each other so much. Julia, it sounds like you're in a car. I can hear some background noise. Are you going somewhere? Christine asked. Julia then explained that she was on a bus on her way back home after taking lunch to Matthew. Christine sounded delighted to hear this. She was happy to know her son was being well fed. But she wasn't pleased that Julia had to take public transport to get there. Why do you have to take the food there yourself? Can't Matthew send one of the numerous company drivers to come pick it up? She asked. Julia didn't want to put any ideas in her head, so she just played it cool, saying she didn't mind delivering the food personally. This was a complete lie for obvious reasons. It's not like anyone would enjoy running up and down just to appease a completely ungrateful person. Before their call ended, Christine offered Julia something that made her whole day. She was overjoyed. All the stress and torture from Matthew didn't even matter anymore. Her mind was already racing with the numerous plans she was about to execute. After getting back home, Julia made herself comfortable and switched off her phone. She decided not to cook anything else, much less take it to him. She had left the other food in his office. If he didn't like it, that was up to him. She knew he would most definitely make things even worse for her tomorrow, but she didn't care. She would be ready for him. Matthew, of course, wolfed down the food immediately after Julia left, but he still kept calling her when she didn't show up with his new meal. Matthew couldn't even concentrate at the office after all the failed attempts to contact Julia. He knew she was purposely doing this, and that only increased his anger. He went home early and tried his best to frustrate Julia, but he wasn't getting the desired reaction from her at all. She just played it cool and did everything he wanted, which frustrated him even more. He vowed to make her miserable the next day and triple her troubles. The next morning, Julia woke up early and prepared everything. She did all her chores happily. Immediately after Matthew left, Julia rushed to his parents' house. Soon after, she was at his office setting out his breakfast. Matthew just observed the bright smile on her face and couldn't understand why she was so happy. "I don't like this coffee. Go get me a different one," he ordered. "Right away, sir," she answered and left, maintaining her smile. Julia went to the parking lot, got in the car, and drove off. This was the great news Christine had given her yesterday. She said Julia could use her car for as long as she wanted. That way, she wouldn't have to use public transport to deliver meals to her son. Julia was obviously elated. Every morning, she had to get Matthew's coffee from the coffee shop while taking his breakfast to him. He had a habit of rejecting the coffee she brought, even though it was always his favorite. Today, he rejected it without even tasting it, and this wasn't the first time. Julia majestically drove to the coffee shop in the luxury car and got the very same flavor she had bought earlier. It was his money. He could waste it however he wanted. She got back to the company and took the coffee to him. Matthew stared at her, but he didn't see any defensiveness. She was just cool and composed. He ordered that she bring his lunch much earlier today, and Julia politely agreed, no objections. Driving was a hobby for her. She wouldn't even mind doing it the whole day. Fueling the car wasn't a problem either. Christine had a fuel card and had told her she could use it however much she liked. Julia was vibing. How many maids did you see driving a fancy car? Julia had barely arrived at the house when Matthew called, asking her to deliver some important documents he had left in his room immediately. She agreed immediately and politely. She went up to his bedroom and found the file he was talking about. There were no documents inside. It was literally filled with empty papers. Not a drop of ink could be seen on them. Julia knew he did this on purpose. He could have easily placed some unimportant documents here and had her deliver them, but he opted for empty papers just to rile her up. However, she would not give him the pleasure of seeing her miserable, not anymore. He clearly derived joy from making her suffer, so she would no longer give in to his stupid antics. Julia carried the documents back to the car and smartly drove off. This car was so beautiful and comfortable. She was really enjoying the luxury car's smell and smooth ride. In fact, if Matthew hadn't given her reasons to drive around, she would have created a few just to enjoy the car. Matthew couldn't believe his eyes when he saw a very happy Julia walking into his office with the blank papers he had asked her to bring, just minutes after he had ordered her to do so. He wondered how she had arrived so fast and why she looked so cheerful. Hadn't she seen that they were just blank papers? Julia left him in a state of shock and returned to the parking lot. She thoroughly enjoyed the look of confusion on his face. It was comical. She then drove back home, fully equipped the vehicle, and returned to the company to deliver his lunch. As expected, Matthew outrightly refused the food without even tasting it. Apparently, his spirit didn't align with the meal, something about hearts and desires. Julia kept her warm expression. "Sir, I am so sorry. I'll go back home and prepare something better. Please just give me 30 minutes, she pleaded, took the food, and left. Matthew was completely puzzled. What in the world was wrong with Julia? Why was she being so complacent? And why did she have to take the food with her? Couldn't she leave it here while she went to prepare another one? He had actually planned to eat it after she left, just like he had done yesterday. The meal looked really delicious. Now he had to wait again. What if she didn't come back and ignored his calls like last time? Matthew was getting really irritated. Meanwhile, Julia was in a very cheerful mood. She returned to the comfortable luxury car and enjoyed the food Matthew had just rejected while watching a movie. This parking space was well-sheltered and private, so she had no issues. Besides, the security team at the company knew her well. When the reminder alarm she had set went off, she paused her movie, got out of the driver's seat, and walked around to open the trunk of the car. The trunk was meticulously organized with everything she could think of, thanks to her experience dealing with Matthew for so long. She now had a faint idea of how his mind worked, and she used it to her advantage. Julia picked up another package of food she had prepared, closed the trunk, and went back up to his office. She served him the meal while Matthew just stared at her, trying to figure out the reason behind her cheerful attitude and sudden efficiency at her job. "Sir, your food is here. Home-cooked and warm. Tell me if it's up to your standards. If it isn't, I'll be more than glad to go back home and prepare something else for you," she said with a smile. Matthew wanted to reject the food again, but he was hungry, and this meal looked even more appetizing than the first one. He didn't want to wait for another hour, but he still wanted to torment her, just not with his food this time. He picked up the bottle of fruit juice, took a sip, and immediately started to complain. "Why would you bring me passion fruit juice? And why is there so much sugar in it? Do I look like a child to you?" he barked. He ordered her to go back home and prepare fresh juice for him. Julia asked him what kind of juice he preferred, but he obviously didn't give her any options. She profusely apologized, took the bottle of juice, and walked out, promising to do exactly as he had said. Matthew didn't understand her attitude at all. She was way too mellow, it wasn't normal. After she left, he hurriedly ate the food like a starved animal. Meanwhile, Julia returned to the car, opened the trunk, placed the passion fruit juice Matthew had rejected in the cooler, picked up some freshly chopped fruits, and blended them in the portable blender she had carried. She made fresh juice for herself, got back into the car, and resumed watching her movie while leisurely enjoying her drink. When the alarm went off once again, Julia went to the trunk, opened the cooler, picked out the same bottle of juice Matthew had rejected, and returned to his office. "I brought your juice, sir," she informed him. Matthew couldn't believe his eyes. He had thought she wouldn't even come back, yet here she was, on time and looking way too comfortable for his liking. "What juice is that?" he asked. "Lime juice, sir." "Lime?" he shouted. "Since when have you seen me drink lime juice? Are you sane?" he barked. "I'm so sorry, sir," Julia said. "Actually, I have never seen you drink lime juice. I know your favorite is passion fruit. That's why I was very surprised when you rejected it earlier. Since you didn't tell me what you would prefer, I had to outsource. That's why I decided to prepare lime juice for you, sir," she explained. "Well, I don't want lime juice. Passion fruit is my favorite, just like you said. You know this, yet you went and prepared lime juice. Are you okay?" he reprimanded. "I'm so sorry, sir. What would you like?" she asked. "I want passion fruit juice. Go back and make it at home. Don't buy me any fake drinks from the streets. I know the difference," he warned. "Oh, sir, I think there has been some miscommunication on my part. I actually made lime juice earlier, but I drank it myself. I prepared another passion fruit juice for you, so this is actually passion fruit juice. I just reduced the amount of sugar since you are not a child, like you said," Julia explained kindly, keeping her smile on. Matthew couldn't believe his ears. He grabbed the juice bottle and drank some. To his shock, it was indeed passion fruit juice. He was rendered speechless. This was the second time she had left him speechless. The first was when she attacked him right here in his office. Julia actually dared to trick him, and he completely fell for it. How dare she make a fool out of him? "Sir, I hope it's up to your taste," Julia said, trying her best to contain her laughter. The look on Matthew's face was priceless. "It's too warm." "Why would you bring me a warm drink?" he complained after a while. "Oh, that is not a problem. I can get you some ice from the freezer in the break room. I'm sure there's more than enough there," Julia offered. "Get out of my face right now," Matthew shouted. He was tired of Julia having a solution to every single stumbling block he set for her, and her happy face was riling him up. She was clearly mocking him, and there was no way he would allow her to succeed. The days that followed were not any better. All of Matthew's efforts to frustrate Julia ended up frustrating him even more. He intensified his antics, but nothing evoked the desired reaction from Julia. She was honestly enjoying herself, driving up and down to get whatever Matthew wanted. Sometimes, she would just park the car in the parking lot as usual, watch a movie, vibe to some music, or just sleep peacefully as she waited for his next stupid request. Then in the evening, she would drive Christine's car back to their house, since she didn't want Matthew to find out that she was using his mother's car. She knew she couldn't hide it from him forever. He would eventually find out. The longer he didn't, the longer she enjoyed herself, because she knew that the moment Matthew found out, he would do everything possible to find other ways to frustrate her. and she wanted to delay that for as long as she could. So, in the evenings, she would drive Christine's car to her house and get it back in the morning. The security there knew her as well, so she could go in and out however she liked, just like at the company. Julia was chilling in the car at the company parking lot as usual. She had just delivered Matthew's breakfast and was now waiting for his next command, which she suspected would come at any moment. And surely enough, her phone rang. "Bring the document file from the cabinet right now." "You have only 10 minutes, he ordered. "Which one exactly, sir?" "You know there are various cabinets in your bedroom and all over the house too. There are so many document files in them as well. If you could please be specific about the file you want and the cabinet I can find it in, I'm sure I can have it delivered to you faster, sir," she requested. 8 minutes, he said, and ended the call. Julia just rolled her eyes.
Typical.
He was probably hoping she would deliver the wrong document so that he could get a fresh reason to torment her. She most definitely wouldn't give him the pleasure. Julia carefully searched through the piles of files she had carried. She had been moving with every single important file she could find in the house and would always arrange them back in the cabinets before Matthew arrived home from work. She read through the files until she found one that contained a project plan she had overheard the employees mentioning on numerous occasions. She knew a lot about the workings of this place and how the company operated. She had vivid memories of most of the ongoing projects. In less than 8 minutes, she walked into Matthew's office holding the documents. Matthew could not believe his eyes. He thought he was just imagining her, but Nancy, who was in his office, also seemed to be equally shocked. She had been right here when Matthew made that phone call just 5 minutes ago. There was no way Julia could bring the file that fast. "I hope this is the file you requested," she said, placing the file on Matthew's desk. Matthew grabbed it and looked through it curiously. After confirming that she somehow managed to get the correct file, he still wasn't satisfied. At this point, his suspicions were confirmed. Something was off, and he needed to find out what it was. His old tactics were no longer working at all. "Sir, I hope everything is okay? If it's not the correct file, I don't mind going back home to get the right one," she assured. "It's the correct document, but it has a lot of errors that need to be corrected before I sign it. Nancy is very busy with some other tasks, and since it's urgent, you'll have to do it yourself. I need you to retype this entire file and bring it to me for review." "You have only 30 minutes, he said, throwing the file back on his desk. But Julia made no move to get it. "Hello, didn't you hear me?" he called out. "I heard you clearly, sir, but I'm not doing it," she said confidently. "Excuse me?" he asked. "I said I'm not working on these documents," she repeated clearly. "And why won't you?" he demanded. "Simply because it is not part of my job description," she answered. "Are you normal? You are my servant. Your job description is to serve me, and that means you do every single thing I ask you to do," he ordered. "You are very correct, sir, and I will do whatever you ask me to do, as long as it is within my job description. In fact, I've already gone beyond that. It's not my job to deliver work documents to you. I'm just helping because age has clearly caught up with you, and now you are an amnesiac or something, so much so that you can't remember to carry your own work documents. Somehow you don't have soft copies, or you're just incompetent at your job. I don't understand why the whole thing has to be retyped, but I am your maid. I'm even dressed like one, as you can see. My job is to cook, clean, basically just do your house chores, serving you as a person. So if you want me to deliver your food to you, I will do that. I've been doing it. If you want me to carry you right now and bathe you, I will scrub you properly. But that is where it stops. Anything pertaining to your profession and career, I am not to be involved in, and I will not do it. That is not what I'm paid for. There are so many people you pay to do that around here. If Nancy is too busy, find someone else to do it because, as for me, I am selectively literate. At this very moment, I can't read, I can't write, I don't even know how to operate a computer, let alone type. In fact, I don't even know what is written in these documents I just brought. I didn't even open them. I just relied on hope, hoping they were the correct documents. So please, I cannot help you. What I can do is go back to the kitchen where I belong because you and I both know that all you do the whole day is eat, 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 and soon enough you're going to want your lunch. So let me just go back, prepare your food, and bring it to you since it's in my job description, okay? "If there's nothing else you need within my job description, I will be on my way," she said with so much boldness that it was unbelievable. After Julia left, the office room was in total silence. Nancy was so shocked, she couldn't believe her ears. Julia had reprimanded, insulted, and disregarded the CEO's orders and walked out scot-free. How was that possible? Nancy had been keeping her distance from Julia because Matthew had somehow found out that she had a habit of taunting Julia, and he warned Nancy not to ever dare disrespect Julia. If she ever tried again, she would be fired because, apparently, only he had the right to bully Julia. So that is why Nancy kept her distance. She needed this job. She realized she stood no chance with Matthew. The man barely spared her a second look. She had thought Matthew hated Julia, but she slowly came to realize that wasn't the case. Julia was the only person who could go in and out of his office whenever she liked. No one else had that privilege. Even important clients had to make appointments and wait outside his office just to speak with him. Even she, herself, being his PA, was barely ever allowed in. She only came in with permission. Julia didn't even knock. And a few days ago, they saw Julia driving a very fancy luxury car that appeared to have obviously been given to her by Matthew. It now seemed like the reason Julia came to the company several times a day wasn't that Matthew wanted to torment her, but rather that he seemed to enjoy her presence. The maid uniform was probably a fetish of his, or something. They even lived together. Nancy realized whatever was going on between the two was beyond her, so she kept her distance. Matthew, on the other hand, was deep in thought. This was most definitely not the first time he had seen that side of Julia, but he had thought he was in full control. It seemed like she had developed so much confidence for some reason. The first thing that gave her confidence to talk back at him was her readiness to quit her job at the company. The second thing was his parents' support. He wondered what was giving her confidence this time. He had to find out. "Nancy, go out, find her, and ask her to come back to my office right now. I'm sure she hasn't gone that far. She must be heading for the bus stop down the road," he ordered. Nancy knew who he was talking about. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm sure she has driven out by now," she explained, and that caught Matthew's attention. "Driven out?"
What do you mean? He asked.
After Nancy briefly explained what she meant, Matthew immediately called the security department and asked them to send him all the parking lot footage for the past few days and to link him to the live footage of all the cameras in the company. He then took his time to carefully examine them. It wasn't long before he found out how much he had been played and fooled by Julia. He didn't know whether to applaud her intelligence or punish her for making a fool out of him. He called the security team again to reprimand them for not informing him about the leisure moments his personal staff had been having at his company. The security didn't even know how to answer him. They didn't know they had to inform him about it. Everyone in the company knew how much Julia struggled working as the CEO's personal assistant. They thought he was just a demanding man with many needs, but once Nancy took over the job, they saw the difference in how he treated Julia and how he was treating Nancy. Julia used to run around the whole company, and even after she quit her job at the company, she somehow ended up becoming his house staff. It seemed like Matthew had a personal vendetta against Julia, and no one wanted to meddle. Everyone knew Julia only came to the company to meet the CEO, and since she delivered his meals every day, he logically gave her one of his cars. It only took a single look at the car to know Julia could never afford anything like it. She couldn't even afford to rent it. So they didn't try to mess with the CEO's personal maid. They never saw anything to report to him, and no one else in the company meddled. It's not like Matthew was an approachable guy anyone could easily chat with, so he remained ignorant about Julia's enjoyment. For the next few hours, Matthew just watched the footage. There was a camera directly positioned to where Julia normally parked her car, and he got a really clear view. From what he could tell, she had been really enjoying herself. Everything made so much sense now. He patiently waited, keeping his eyes on the live feed. He knew she would drive in any time soon. After Julia prepared the different meals and packed up the car with everything else she needed, she drove to the company, performing her normal routine. But this time around, someone was diligently watching and waiting. Once Julia walked into Matthew's office, she immediately noticed a change in the entire feel of the place. What caught her attention was Matthew's eyes, which were fixed on her from the moment she walked in. It was like he knew she was going to walk in. On the several occasions she had come here, he would be busy doing something work-related, but this time, he was just sitting comfortably and staring. He wasn't glaring at her, he didn't seem angry, he was just staring with his usual blank facial expression. Julia knew something was definitely up. Months of working for this guy had taught her to keep her guard up regarding any unusual activity and behavior when it came to him, because there would always be a reason, and a sinister one at that. So the best she could do was stay quiet and wait. She felt like his sudden change in demeanor had something to do with her earlier outburst. She had left immediately without giving him a chance to counteract, so he was most likely still brooding. "So, how was your drive here?" Matthew spoke after a moment of silence. Julia was caught off guard by the question, but she immediately regained her composure. That question gave her a clear understanding of the situation. It seemed like he had finally found out about the car. This was bound to happen eventually. She now understood why Matthew seemed so steady. He had found a new way to advance his torture and kill her joy. She wondered what his next foolish reasoning would be. "Smooth, sir. My drive was very smooth. Thank you for asking," she answered. Matthew was amazed by her audacity to answer him so boldly. "So, you've been driving around with my mom's car," he stated. "Oh yes," Julia agreed, but not without her permission. "She said I could use the car for as long as I wanted," she added. "So, you accused me to my mother, right? You must have told her that I make you move up and down, right?" he blamed. "Well, that wouldn't be a lie. You do make me move up and down." But I didn't say anything to her. She just happened to call me when I was on a bus and she realized it. I explained to her that I was just on my way back after dropping your lunch off. She was happy and said I could use her car for easier movement. She even offered to fully gift the car to me. "I'm the one who turned it down," she explained. "And why didn't you tell me about it?" he questioned. Julia said that she didn't know she had to explain everything to him. He never cared to ask how she got there. All he wanted were his orders and demands met the way he wanted. "So, is that why you've been carrying my food in the car? Keeping the food I consume in my system in a car trunk?" he asked accusingly. "Is there something wrong with that?" Julia asked. "Are you crazy? My mother begged me to hire you because she wanted me to eat clean, fresh, home-cooked food, but you have decided to pollute my meals with chemicals. Does that make any sense to you?" he barked. Julia didn't understand what he was trying to imply. "Whatever does that mean, sir? Why do I always have to lay everything out for you? How daft are you?" he mocked. "Don't you know how much emissions cars release and how dangerous they are to our health? Yet you've been keeping the food I eat in a car for hours. Are you trying to kill me?" he shouted. Julia stared at him in disbelief. All she could do was giggle. She thought she had heard him wrong. "Did I crack a joke?" he asked. "I think so. This has to be a joke. How else am I supposed to transport your food to you?" she asked. "That is none of my business. All I want is my meals on time, and my food will not be carried around in any automotive. I don't want any engine-powered means of transportation to be used to carry my food, not even a motorbike. I am an important person. I won't allow your incompetence to damage my health and risk my life. So I'm not eating this food that you've brought. It's contaminated. You need to go back and prepare something else. I don't want anything from that car," he explained firmly. "So I should fly here or trek all the way just to bring you food?" Julia asked in disbelief. "And why can't you trek? Don't you have legs?" he retorted. Julia didn't even know how to react. So many thoughts ran through her mind. She just stared at Matthew and, at one point, she recalled how she had attacked him in this very office. She so badly wanted to recreate that moment. Matthew seemed to recognize the change in her mood as well and got a little defensive. "Are you planning to attack me?" he asked. At this, Julia smiled brightly. "Of course not, sir. And why would I do that? I think you are absolutely right, sir. Your health is important. You don't have to eat this food. I will surely prepare a different one for you. And you have nothing to worry about. I will do everything I can to bring you healthy food. I will ride a donkey if I have to." She smiled. Matthew could hear and see the mockery in her tone and expression. "A donkey? Where will you find a donkey?" he asked, curious about how silly that statement was.
Don't worry about that.
I am a disciple of Jesus. He will direct me to where I can find a donkey. Just be patient. I'll be right back, she assured him, picked up the food package and walked out of the office. Matthew was completely confused. Julia kept shocking him one thing after another. She was like an unsolvable puzzle. He couldn't understand her, and it was getting exhausting to constantly pull ropes with her. It seemed like she was done with it as well. Matthew turned back to the live camera feeds to find out where she had gone. It seemed like she was still within the company. After leaving Matthew's office, Julia went straight to the company's break room. She had no desire to go back to the house. It would be pointless since he would most likely call her back anyway. So, she decided to clear her head and relax while thinking of a way forward. It was lunch break, and most employees had gone out for lunch. A few were still around, including some who were eating in the break room. Julia walked in, found a seat, and helped herself to the food Matthew had just rejected. If he didn't want it, she would enjoy it herself. No need to waste a good meal. Julia was in the middle of enjoying her meal when Matthew walked in and sat right across from her. Every other employee in the break room quietly walked out after he arrived, leaving only the two of them in the large room. Julia ignored his presence and kept eating her food. Matthew didn't say anything. He just watched her silently until she finished her meal and finally paid attention to him.
I'm hungry, he said.
Julia just stared at him without saying a word. Since you finished my food, I need to go out to get something to eat, and you're coming with me, he added. Julia kept staring at him curiously, wondering what he was up to now. She said she would drive herself, but Matthew insisted she come along in his car and give him the keys to his mother's car. He said he would have someone drive it back to the house. I refuse, Julia said. Why? Matthew asked. Because I don't trust you. This seems like a trap. It feels like you're planning to drive me to some remote place, drop me there, and make me trek all the way back to the house. Let's not act like that's something you wouldn't do, Julia accused. Matthew just laughed it off. She obviously had valid reasons to mistrust him. He promised not to do anything sinister and claimed all he wanted was for her to accompany him for lunch. He even promised to personally drive her home afterward. Julia didn't believe him at all, but she was curious to find out what he was up to. He had never asked her to accompany him anywhere for something non-work related, so she reluctantly agreed to go with him. The car ride was silent. Julia kept looking out the window to make sure she understood her surroundings. She didn't trust Matthew one bit.